The music was loud enough to drown out thought, or so she believed until his voice sliced through the laughter like glass. She stood near the kitchen doorway, plastic cups sweating in her hand, pretending to scroll her phone while the room pulsed with light and movement. Someone shouted a joke. Someone else spilled a drink. Then he spoke, careless, confident, unguarded. "I swear, I'd rather die than marry her." The words landed wrong. Too clear. Too sharp. For a second she thought she imagined them, that the bass had twisted sound into cruelty. But then came the laughter, not shocked, not nervous, just easy. Familiar. She looked up and saw him leaning against the counter, grinning, drink raised, eyes bright with the comfort of being understood. Her chest tightened. 8 years collapsed into a single breath. The apartment they shared. The plans postponed. The questions she learned not to ask. Marriage had always been a future thing, something he waved away with jokes and timing, and not yet. She told herself patience was love. She told herself silence was maturity. She stayed still. That was the first choice she made. His friends added comments, half mocking, half approving. Someone said her name. Someone said she was nice. Another said nice wasn't enough. Each word peeled something open inside her. She felt heat crawl up her neck, felt her face stiffen into a mask she had practiced for years. No one noticed her standing there. Or maybe they did, and decided she didn't matter. She stepped back quietly, heart hammering, so hard she was sure it could be heard over the music. In the bathroom, she locked the door and pressed her palms to the sink. The mirror showed a woman who looked normal. Too normal. She waited for tears. They didn't come. What came instead was a strange, ringing calm. This was the moment she realized. Not the fights. Not the loneliness. Not the nights she cried beside him while he slept. This sentence. Spoken easily. Without fear of consequence. She left the party without saying goodbye. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sobering. Inside, the music continued. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't read. She walked until her legs ached, until the city blurred, until the weight in her chest hardened into something solid. By the time she reached home, a decision had already been made. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just final. He would wake up tomorrow thinking everything was fine. He wouldn't know that a single sentence had just ended their future. And she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of watching her break. She stood in the doorway of their apartment later, keys trembling, listening to the silence he never noticed. The walls held their memories without judgment. She exhaled slowly, already learning the shape of absence, already stepping toward a life that would no longer beg for permission. Outside, somewhere, laughter continued, unaware that something irrevocable had quietly shifted forever. That night alone, he didn't notice at first. Morning light crept through the curtains, touching the empty side of the bed where she usually slept curled inward, making herself small. He reached out, still half asleep, expecting warmth. His hand met cold sheets. He frowned, rolled over, checked his phone. No messages. No missed calls. He shrugged and got up, convinced she had an early errand. She was already gone. Across town. She folded her life into boxes with mechanical precision. She packed only what was hers. Clothes he never complimented. Books he mocked for being emotional. Shoes worn thin from waiting at doors for him. Each item felt lighter once lifted, as if it too wanted to leave. She avoided the mirror. She avoided memory. She moved fast, afraid that if she slowed down, she would change her mind. The apartment smelled like detergent and finality. She found the sweater he loved on her, paused, then left it behind. Not revenge. Release. On the table sat a small box she didn't recognize. Her hands shook as she opened it. Empty. Just velvet, indented by something once imagined. She closed it gently and placed it back, exactly where it was, like a secret she would never claim. Her phone buzzed. His name flashed. Once. Twice. She turned the phone face down and slid it into her bag. Silence, she decided, would be her last gift to him. No explanations. No scenes. He had already spoken his truth. By noon, the apartment looked untouched. Too neat. Too quiet. She wrote nothing. Left no note. Even her toothbrush was gone, a small detail that would confuse him later. She took one last look, not to mourn, but to remember the woman who stayed when she should have left sooner. When he came home that evening, irritation greeted him first. Why hadn't she answered? Why was dinner not started? He called out her name, annoyed by the echo. Then he noticed the closet, the hangers, the space. His stomach dropped as understanding crept in, slow and unwelcome. He dialed her number again, straight to voicemail. Only then did he feel it, the thin edge of fear. Not love. Fear of inconvenience. Fear of questions he couldn't answer. He sat on the couch, staring at the door, waiting for her to walk back and laughing, forgiving, ready to pretend nothing happened. But the door stayed closed. And somewhere across the city, she slept on a stranger's couch, staring at the ceiling, realizing that leaving hurt less than staying ever did. She didn't feel brave. She felt hollow, scraped raw, suspended between relief and grief. Yet beneath the ache, something unfamiliar stirred. Ownership. Her future no longer required permission, patience, or performance. Tomorrow would bring questions, bills, uncertainty. Tonight brought quiet. And quiet, she learned, could be a beginning. It scared her, but fear finally belonged to her, not him. And that difference, however small, felt like the first honest promise she had kept for herself at last alone tonight. 3 days passed before he understood she was not coming back. Not because the signs were subtle, but because he refused to read them. Her side of the closet remained empty. The bathroom echoed without her humming. The fridge held leftovers she would never finish. Each absence waited patiently, certain he would eventually notice. On the third morning, he sent a text. "Did you take my charger?" He stared at the screen, expecting irritation, expecting her quick reply. Nothing came. He frowned, annoyed more than worried. She had always responded. Always. Even when she was hurt, she answered. Across town, she sat in a borrowed kitchen, nursing cold coffee and staring out the window. The city moved like nothing had happened. Buses ran. People laughed. Life continued with cruel efficiency. Her phone lay beside her, silent by choice. Every vibration felt imagined. She told herself not responding was not a game. It was a boundary. That afternoon, he told his friends she was overreacting. He laughed when he said it, forcing ease into the sentence. Someone asked if she had really heard him. He waved the question away. Of course she hadn't. If she had, she would be yelling, crying, begging. She always explained herself. That night, alone on the couch, he scrolled through her social media. No posts. No clues. It irritated him. He liked knowing where she was emotionally. Liked being the center of her attention. Silence felt like a challenge he didn't remember agreeing to. She spent the evening unpacking what little she owned. Each object claimed a corner of the room, proof she existed outside him. She cried while folding socks. Laughed at herself for crying over socks. Healing, she realized, was not dramatic. It was awkward and lonely and quiet. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. "We need to talk." Her chest tightened. Not apology. Not concern. Control. She turned the phone off. The relief was instant and terrifying. When he woke the next morning to find her number unreachable, irritation turned sharp. He told himself she was being childish. Yet his hands shook as he searched through old messages, looking for a version of himself that sounded kinder than he remembered. She walked past couples holding hands and felt both envy and relief. Love had never felt like safety with him. It felt like auditioning, like waiting for approval that never came. For the first time, she admitted the truth she avoided for years. She had been shrinking. That night, he stood in their bedroom, surrounded by her absence, finally aware of how much space she used to fill. Not with noise, with presence. He sat on the edge of the bed, heart racing, confused by a loss he didn't choose. Across the city, she locked the door of her temporary room and leaned against it, breathing deeply. For 3 days, she had chosen herself. It didn't feel powerful. It felt fragile. But fragility, she was learning, could still hold. Neither of them slept well. One wondered when silence would end. The other wondered why she ever believed she had to earn love. She woke to the sound of her own breathing, shallow and uneven, like she had been running in her sleep. The room was unfamiliar, too quiet, walls bare except for a small clock that ticked too loudly. For a moment, panic flared. Then memory arrived, heavy and exact. She had left. She was safe. She was alone. The day dragged. She wandered the neighborhood with nowhere to go, phone heavy, in her pocket, like a dare. Every step felt wrong, without someone to report back to. Hunger came and went unnoticed. What stayed was the ache, deep and constant, the kind that asked questions without answers. Had she imagined the cruelty? Had she exaggerated his words to justify leaving? By afternoon, the doubt sharpened. She sat on the edge of the bed and replayed the party in her mind, again and again, hoping the sentence would soften. It didn't. Each repetition hurt the same. Worse, it sounded clearer, more deliberate. She pressed her palms to her face and finally cried, quietly, ashamed of the sound. A knock interrupted her spiral. She froze. Another knock, gentler. She wiped her cheeks and opened the door a crack. A woman stood there, holding a grocery bag, eyes kind but cautious. She introduced herself, explained she'd heard crying through the thin walls, and wanted to check. No questions. No assumptions. Something in that restraint broke her. She invited the woman in. They sat on opposite sides of the room, strangers sharing borrowed air. When asked if she was okay, she surprised herself by answering honestly. No. The word felt dangerous and relieving at once. She spoke in fragments. About the party. The sentence. The leaving. The woman listened without interrupting, without offering solutions. When she finished, the room felt lighter, like a storm had passed through and moved on. The woman nodded slowly, then said something simple that settled deep. You didn't overreact. You responded. After the door closed again, silence returned, different now. Less sharp. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting the truth land. She had not ruined anything. What broke had already been cracked. Staying would not have fixed it. Across town, he stared at his phone, anger giving way to something heavier. He typed an apology and erased it. Typed again. Erased again. The words felt thin. Inadequate. He wondered when he had stopped choosing kindness over ego, and why he assumed she would always be there. That night, she slept for hours without dreaming. When she woke, the ache was still there, but beneath it lived something new. A quiet certainty. Pain had a voice, and she had finally listened. Tomorrow would still hurt. Healing was not linear. But for the first time, rock bottom did not feel like the end. It felt like ground, solid enough to stand on. She closed her eyes, knowing morning would test her resolve, yet trusting she could endure discomfort, doubt, loneliness, and fear without betraying herself again, ever from now. Morning arrived without ceremony. She sat at the small table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching steam disappear faster than her certainty. The stranger's words echoed, gentle but firm, and they unsettled her more than comfort should. Kindness felt suspicious when pain was familiar. She left the room determined to stay busy. Walking helped, she told herself. Movement meant progress. Yet every street corner carried memories she hadn't lived, futures she once imagined with him. Her phone stayed silent, a deliberate choice that both steadied and frightened her. Silence was power, but it was also loneliness. At a cafe, she ordered coffee she didn't need. While waiting, she noticed a man struggling with a stack of boxes near the door. Without thinking, she held it open. He thanked her, surprised, like courtesy was rare. The moment lingered. It reminded her she still existed in the world, useful and visible. They shared a table by accident, then by conversation. Nothing deep at first. Weather, work, the city's noise. He listened when she spoke, not scanning the room, not interrupting. That alone felt radical. When he asked why she looked tired, she hesitated, then shrugged. I'm starting over. He nodded, accepting the answer without demanding details. Across town, he paced their apartment, rehearsing regret. He imagined grand apologies, dramatic gestures, anything that would restore order. What unsettled him most wasn't losing her affection. It was losing access. She had removed herself from his reach, and the loss bruised his pride. Back at the cafe, the conversation drifted. She found herself laughing, then immediately guilty for it. Joy felt disloyal to pain. The man noticed her sudden quiet and asked a single question that pierced her defenses. "Who taught you that you have to earn love?" The words landed hard. She couldn't answer. She stared at her cup, throat tight, realizing how often she had negotiated for basic care. The relationship hadn't failed suddenly. It had eroded slowly, aided by her willingness to accept crumbs. She paid quickly and stood overwhelmed. Outside, air rushed into her lungs like permission. She didn't take his number. She didn't need to. The encounter had already done its work. That night, alone again, she wrote a list of rules on scrap paper. No explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding. No shrinking to maintain peace. No mistaking attention for intention. The list felt fragile, aspirational, but necessary. She folded the paper and placed it beside her bed. Tomorrow would test every word. Healing was asking new questions, and the first one burned quietly in the dark. If she never went back, who could she become? She understood answers would come slowly, shaped by courage rather than habit. For now, she promised herself presence, honesty, and rest. The past would still knock. When it did, she would remember the cafe, the question, and the strength of choosing forward, even when certainty refused to follow. Tomorrow demanded patience, boundaries, courage, humility, resilience, self-trust, clarity, hope, persistence, balance, faith. He returned home just after midnight, keys loud in the lock, expecting the familiar silence she usually broke by asking about his day. The apartment answered with nothing. He dropped his bag, irritated, convinced she was still sulking somewhere inside. He called her name once. Then again. No response. He checked the bedroom. The bed was made too neatly. Her pillows gone. The closet door stood open, half empty. Hangers aligned like teeth after an extraction. A slow unease crawled up his spine. He laughed under his breath, dismissive. She was dramatic, always had been. She would cool off. She always did. He sent a message telling her to stop playing games. The words sounded right until they echoed back at him through the quiet. Across town, she sat cross-legged on a borrowed mattress, scrolling job listings she barely read. Each application felt like a small rebellion. Independence looked dull on a screen, but it pulsed with possibility. Her phone buzzed, then went silent again. She didn't check. He tried calling. Straight to voicemail. He frowned, then tried again, irritation sharpening into something thinner. He told himself blocking him was childish, but his chest tightened anyway. Control had always reassured him. Silence did not. He paced the apartment, noticing details he had ignored for years. The plant she watered, the calendar she maintained, the order she created without being asked. He had mistaken consistency for permanence. Now the rooms felt staged, like a life paused mid-scene. She unpacked a single box and stopped. The quiet pressed in, but it no longer accused her. She realized she was tired of performing calm while bleeding privately. Leaving hadn't fixed the pain. It had simply stopped the daily injury. He sat on the couch and replayed the party, searching for excuses. He hadn't meant it that way. Everyone joked like that. But the memory shifted, stubborn, highlighting the comfort in his voice. He remembered her devotion and felt a flicker of something close to fear. She turned off the light and lay back, breathing through the uncertainty. Fear visited too, whispering about money, loneliness, regret. She listened, then let it pass. Fear was information, not instruction. Near dawn, he drafted an apology he didn't send. It asked for patience, not forgiveness. It promised change without specifics. He stared at the unsent message, unsettled by the realization that words had failed him before. She slept lightly, waking once with a hand on her chest, grounding herself. For the first time, the future did not include explaining herself to someone determined not to understand. Morning would arrive with consequences for both of them. One would wake desperate to regain control. The other would wake learning how to live without asking permission. Neither understood yet that this moment would divide their lives permanently, one chasing echoes of authority lost, the other discovering that freedom begins quietly, grows painfully, and rewards only those willing to endure uncertainty without surrendering dignity or returning to familiar harm disguised as love. He heard it from someone else, which made it worse. Not an accusation, not gossip, just a question asked too carefully. "Did you really say that?" His friend's voice carried doubt, not humor. The room felt smaller. He shrugged, pretending confidence. But the words replayed themselves with cruel clarity. "Rather than marry her." Hearing it echoed back, stripped the joke bare. Faces around him shifted, curiosity replacing laughter. For the first time, he wondered how it sounded without music, without drinks, without the comfort of an audience. His smile faltered, exposing fear he had never named before aloud then. The question followed him home, clinging to the walls like smoke. He replayed the night, searching for a version where he was misunderstood. Friends defended her quietly, saying she deserved certainty. That word irritated him. Certainty sounded like a trap. He told himself commitment ruined things, that freedom meant options. Yet the apartment felt emptier than before. He checked his phone repeatedly, expecting anger, tears, demands. There was nothing. Silence pressed harder than confrontation ever had. It accused him of cruelty, cowardice, and truth he could no longer outrun without admitting loss or responsibility for consequences he caused himself today. She learned the truth indirectly too, through absence turning solid. The world had not collapsed after leaving. It simply continued without him. That realization stung. She expected regret to chase her harder. Instead, it circled politely. She filled her days with small tasks, grounding rituals, long walks. Each step rewired something fragile inside. When doubt surfaced, she remembered the sentence exactly. Memory became armor. Pain still arrived, but it no longer negotiated her worth. She stopped translating silence into rejection and started hearing her own voice steadier, quieter. Finally respected by herself, for the first time in years, passed alone. He met the friend again days later, hoping reassurance would soften reality. Instead, honesty arrived. They told him she heard everything. The sentence landed heavier now, stripped of bravado. He imagined her standing there, silent, absorbing humiliation without defense. Shame rose, unfamiliar and hot. He wanted to argue intent, but intent sounded hollow. Impact mattered. He saw himself clearly, a man protected by her patience. The clarity terrified him more than losing her ever had. Regret followed, slow and useless, demanding action he had delayed for years with excuses and comfort until consequences finally arrived uninvited and undeniable at last. That night, both lay awake under different ceilings, confronting the same truth from opposite sides. Words, once released, could not be reclaimed. Silence, once chosen, could not be undone easily. He wondered if apologies could cross distance. She wondered if peace required forgiveness. Neither slept. The future hovered, unanswered. One path chased redemption. The other guarded self-respect. Morning would demand choices neither could postpone, and consequences would finally speak. What followed would define who they became when love stopped protecting them and truth refused comfort. Both sensed an ending and a beginning approaching, without negotiation or return, only consequence ahead. She woke before the alarm, sunlight cutting clean lines across the floor. The room still felt borrowed, but it no longer felt temporary. She dressed with intention, choosing clothes that fit her body, not his preferences, and stepped outside with a steadier spine. Work came through faster than expected. A short contract, modest pay, honest hours. The office smelled like coffee and printer ink, ordinary and grounding. She learned names, learned systems, learned how competence quieted anxiety. Each completed task stitched confidence back into place. He noticed the change from afar. A mutual friend mentioned seeing her downtown, laughing, hair different, posture lighter. The image unsettled him more than anger would have. He wanted evidence she was broken without him. Growth felt like betrayal. One evening, leaving work, she turned a corner and nearly collided with him. The city shrank to the space between their bodies. He looked thinner, older. Relief flashed across his face before guilt replaced it. Her heart kicked hard, then steadied. They stood awkwardly, strangers rehearsing familiarity. He apologized quickly, words tumbling, finally naming the sentence. He said he hadn't meant it. He said fear made him cruel. She listened without interrupting, surprised by her calm. When he finished, silence stretched. She searched herself for the ache that used to bloom at his remorse. It didn't come. What arrived instead was clarity. Apologies explained behavior. They didn't erase it. She told him she was rebuilding. Slowly, carefully. She said she needed consistency, not promises. He nodded, eager, offering dinners, therapy, timelines. The offers felt rehearsed. She recognized the pattern. Urgency only after loss. She declined gently, not because she hated him, but because returning would require shrinking again. The realization felt adult and heavy and right. She wished him well and meant it. He watched her walk away, understanding too late that change demanded discomfort he had avoided. Control slipped fully from his grasp. He stood there, small against the city, rehearsing words no one needed anymore. She kept walking until the noise returned. Her hands shook, but she didn't turn back. Growth, she learned, often felt like grief wearing new clothes. That night, she cooked for herself and ate slowly, honoring hunger without apology. She wrote in her notebook, documenting truth instead of fantasy. The future no longer begged her to wait. Sleep came easier. Before drifting off, she asked herself a question that once terrified her and now felt like permission. What if becoming someone new was the point all along? She acknowledged fear would return, but she trusted practice over perfection. Boundaries would wobble. Loneliness would visit. Still, she would answer with patience, not panic. Tomorrow promised discomfort, decisions, and unfamiliar strength. She welcomed it. For the first time, her life moved forward without negotiation, apology, or shrinking, and that movement felt honest, earned, and irrevocably hers. She breathed, chose courage again, and slept knowing morning would test her resolve, yet she would remain present, steady, and unafraid. At last, truly, on purpose. He asked to meet again 2 days later, a message carefully worded, respectful, almost humble. She stared at it longer than she meant to, not because she missed him, but because the past had trained her to respond. Habit tugged at her fingers. She set the phone down and finished her work before answering. They met in daylight, a neutral cafe, nothing intimate enough to confuse the moment. He arrived early, nervous energy visible in the way he adjusted his sleeves. When she sat, he stood too quickly, smiling like relief had permission. She noticed everything. The eagerness, the restraint, the fear. "I've been thinking," he began. She nodded, letting him continue. He spoke about regret, about therapy appointments he'd scheduled, about realizing he'd taken her presence for granted. His words were polished, sincere on the surface, heavy with urgency underneath. She listened carefully, not for emotion, but for truth. "I'm ready now," he said finally. Marriage, commitment, all of it. The sentence hovered between them. Months ago, it would have undone her. Now it felt oddly hollow. She asked one question, calm and precise. "What changed?" He hesitated. Too long. Then admitted losing you. There it was. Not growth. Loss. The distinction settled quietly inside her. She thanked him for his honesty. He reached for her hand and stopped himself, waiting for permission she did not give. She told him she believed he was sorry. She told him people could change. Then she told him she wasn't interested in being the reason someone finally decided to grow. The word surprised even her, firm and unshaking. His face fell. "So that's it?" he asked, hurt sharp now. "After everything?" "Yes," she said gently. "Because everything already happened." Silence returned, heavier this time. He argued softly, offering patience, timelines, compromise. Each offer sounded like a negotiation, not a promise. She realized with sudden clarity that love had never been the issue. Intention had. She stood first. "I hope you become the man you're trying to be," she said. "Just not for me." Walking away felt different now. No shaking. No second-guessing. Only sadness, clean and honest, for a future that would never exist. He stayed seated long after she left, staring at the empty chair, realizing apologies could not reverse time. Some doors closed quietly, without drama, and never reopened. That evening, she walked home slowly, allowing the ache to surface without panic. She didn't distract herself. She didn't romanticize pain. She simply let it exist. Later, alone, she smiled at the realization that love no longer meant waiting. It meant choosing where to stand. And tonight, she stood firmly within herself, aware that healing wasn't about what he finally offered, but what she finally refused to accept again. She stood at the crossroads longer than necessary, watching traffic split and merge, engines humming like impatient thoughts. Two paths, neither marked, both demanding something different. One led back to familiarity, apologies, and conditional comfort. The other stretched forward, uncertain and unguarded, offering no guarantees except responsibility for herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from him, brief and careful, asking if she was sure. The question stirred an old reflex to explain, soothe, reassure. She recognized it immediately and let it pass. Being sure she was learning did not require permission. She walked home slowly, choosing the longer route. The city felt newly textured, every sound sharp, every smell vivid. Choice did that. It woke the senses. Fear walked beside her, whispering about loneliness and regret, but it no longer led. She acknowledged it like a nervous companion and kept moving. At home, she opened her notebook and reread the rules she had written weeks earlier. They no longer felt aspirational. They felt practiced. She added one more line, "Do not confuse longing with truth." The sentence steadied her. He spent the evening pacing, refreshing his messages, negotiating with himself. He told himself persistence meant love. He told himself timing was flexible. Deep down, he sensed the truth he avoided. She had outgrown the version of him that benefited from delay. She cooked dinner, something simple, eaten without distraction. Nourishment felt intentional now. Afterward, she sat on the floor, back against the couch, breathing through waves of emotion that arrived without warning. Sadness came. Relief followed. Neither stayed. Later, she stepped outside onto the balcony and looked at the lights below. Somewhere, lives intersected and diverged without announcement. Endings happened quietly every day. Beginnings too. She typed a final message to him, not angry, not apologetic. She thanked him for the years they shared and wished him well. She explained she was choosing a life that did not require convincing. She sent it before doubt could intervene. The response came quickly. Too quickly. He asked for another chance. She did not reply. Instead, she turned her phone off and sat with the discomfort. Choosing herself was not dramatic. It was steady, repetitive, sometimes lonely, but it was hers. Morning would bring consequences, questions from friends, moments of weakness. Still, she trusted the process more than the past. Growth demanded consistency, not courage once. As night deepened, she felt the weight of the decision settle into her bones, heavy but right. She understood then that closure was not something given. It was something claimed. She lay down and closed her eyes, aware that tomorrow would test her resolve again. When it did, she would answer the same way, forward, without shrinking, without negotiation, certain enough to continue. She woke to a quiet that no longer felt temporary. Morning light spilled across the floor, warm and deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to watch her choose differently. For the first time in years, there was no message waiting, no emotional debt demanding immediate payment. The absence felt earned. Her days found rhythm. Work, walks, meals eaten without apology. She learned the texture of her own thoughts, how they rose and fell without needing permission. Some mornings hurt. Others surprised her with calm. Healing, she discovered, was inconsistent but honest. He faded into memory in unexpected ways. A song in a store. A street corner. The ghost of laughter. Each reminder stung briefly, then loosened its grip. She no longer romanticized the pain. She let it pass, trusting her resilience more than nostalgia. One afternoon, she caught her reflection in a window and paused. Her shoulders sat differently. Her eyes held steadiness instead of vigilance. The woman looking back was not fearless, but she was intact. That mattered more. Friends noticed the change and asked careful questions. She answered without bitterness, without defense. I left because staying was costing me myself. Saying it aloud sealed something permanent. He heard about her again through distance, through second-hand updates stripped of emotion. She was doing well. She was thriving. The words unsettled him more than anger would have. Growth without him felt like a verdict he could not appeal. She spent an evening sorting old photos, deciding which memories to keep. Not all love was poison. Some had simply expired. She kept the lessons and released the rest, a quiet ritual of closure. Later, alone, she wrote a letter she would never send. Not to accuse, but to acknowledge. She thanked the past for teaching her what neglect looked like. She forgave herself for confusing endurance with devotion. When she finished, she tore the pages carefully and threw them away. Peace did not arrive as fireworks. It arrived as consistency, as boundaries kept, as choices repeated. She realized happiness wasn't loud. It was reliable. Before bed, she thought about the woman she had been when this began, standing in a crowded room, heart breaking in silence. She wished she could reach back and whisper reassurance. You will survive this. You will grow. Sleep came gently. Tomorrow would bring ordinary challenges, but none would require her to disappear. She had learned the difference between love that expands and love that confines. As she drifted off, she understood the truth she once feared. Losing him was not the end of her story. It was the moment she finally became the narrator instead of the footnote, and that realization settled softly, undeniably, into her bones at last. She heard the words in passing, not meant for her, carried on careless laughter in a crowded room. I'd rather die than marry her. The sentence echoed, familiar enough to sting, distant enough to feel strange. For a heartbeat, her body reacted out of memory, not pain. Then it stopped. She stood still, observing herself. No rush of heat. No collapse. No urge to disappear. The moment passed like a wave that no longer owned the shore. The woman being spoken about laughed awkwardly, pretending not to hear. Something old stirred in her chest, not anger, but recognition. She saw herself in that quiet endurance, in the practiced smile that hid confusion and hope. She didn't interrupt. She didn't confront. She simply walked away, choosing not to carry a sentence that wasn't hers. The power was subtle but complete. Outside, the night air felt lighter than it once had. She remembered the girl who packed her life into boxes without a word, who believed silence was the only dignity left to her. That girl had survived. More than that, she had learned. Her phone buzzed with a message from a friend asking how she was doing. She smiled and typed honestly, "I'm good." No qualifiers. No hesitation. The truth fit comfortably now. Later at home, she made tea and sat by the window, watching lights flicker on across the city. Somewhere, people were choosing each other. Somewhere else, someone was choosing to leave. Both were acts of courage. She thought about love, how she once believed it required endurance, patience, self-erasure. She knew better now. Love was not proven by staying quiet while being diminished. Love was mutual recognition. It spoke with clarity. It acted with intention. She no longer measured her worth by someone else's readiness. She measured it by how she felt when she woke up, by how her breath settled when she was alone, by the absence of fear in her own thoughts. The past knocked softly from time to time. When it did, she acknowledged it without opening the door. Closure, she learned, was not a conversation. It was a boundary. She placed her cup in the sink and prepared for bed, moving through the familiar ritual with ease. There were still moments of loneliness, still questions about the future, but none of them asked her to betray herself. As she lay down, she understood the full shape of what had happened. A sentence meant to diminish her had instead redirected her life. Silence, once a wound, had become a choice. Leaving, once terrifying, had become liberation. Tomorrow, she would continue building a life that did not require endurance to survive. And if she ever heard those words again, she knew exactly what she would do. She would leave. Not in pain, not in silence, but in certainty.